do a quick audio check and video check just to make sure we're all here. I'll run through quick roll call. I got emails from Corey that says she won't be here today, and I got one from Judy that says she's going to be late. So, which is unfortunate, but you know, things happen. Let's see. Let's check. Just going through the list. Andrew, is your mic working here? I see your face.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep. Sounds good. Carol?
Thanks.
I'm here.
Great. Pam? I thought I saw you.
I'm here.
Cool. And then Judy, doesn't look like she's in right now. Augustine, we checked yours earlier. So that's Sam.
Yep, here.
Great. And then Peter?
Present.
All right. And then I'm assuming mine works as well because everyone's been responding to me. So great. Welcome, everyone. And with that, I'll pass it over to Augustine.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This guy. All right. So I sent over the oops, let me turn on the lights first. Okay. So I sent over kind of a clean copy of the document we've been working on. I took the comments and the feedback and all the sections that everybody wrote. I took out the changes and you know, they're all still embedded in the document, but they're not visible now. So we resolved all those, resolved the comments, resolved a lot of the changes. So now it actually looks like a document. This is just a temporary cover sheet. I figured I'd check with ELAP and see if they have one that they want me to use, but you know, we could worry about that later. And the title and all that stuff, we can make it a little more catchy down the line. But it has the table contents, all the links are live, all these are updated, so everything should be good as we change things. And it kind of looks like a document now, right? We have, you know, sections and paragraphs and things. There was one section that was still a little bit bullet pointy that Sam got this morning, so it looks great. So I'll add that today. So what I wanted to kind of talk about were the things that we had discussed at the last meeting, things that we added, and then some feedback from everybody else. One thing that I did, I'll start with the ones that I did, is that I cleaned up the calibration section. So I took what I think Andrew wrote this originally and made it a little bit less detailed, I guess. Like we talked about last meeting and all the other meetings, that we're not going to really have instructions on how to do things for people. It would be like, this is what we expect. You got to figure it out. So I kind of cleaned it up. I made it hopefully a little bit you know, less wordy. I took just pretty much what Andrew wrote and then removed the sections on RSD, RE, and RSC, and just we'll put a book or a link to the section in precision that talks about that. And then in the precision section, so I have the kind of the couple tables that exist in the TNI documents of how many calibration standards you'd have to have, how you should measure the relative error. From the last meeting, we kind of decided, I don't know if this is still the case, we kind of decided that we're not going to use correlation coefficient or determination or whatever people call it, R or R squared. Is that still the case? We're just going to suggest that people use RSC and RSD instead? Or should we keep it in there? What do you guys think?
I think we should add a reference to it because it is a commonly used determination. And I think the thought was we would kind of say, oh yeah, you should use RSD and RSE because we like those better. But correlation coefficient is still a commonly used one. I know some folks at regional boards like to use R values or R squared values to determine the effectiveness of specific projects. So
cool. Yeah, I could do that. I mean, Andrew already wrote that section. I just took it out. So I'll just put it back in. I think it was well written how you had it already, Andrew. So I think that works. I'll make a note. Okay, cool. So then I think everything else was kind of what we described. So I will include, I don't know if I can make this thing smaller. We go. So I'll fix this and include the correlation coefficient just as a reference. People can use it. But then in the section on RSD and RSC, I could also reference that we prefer people use RSC instead, but that's acceptable still. One thing that I want to ask Sam and Peter, this calibration section is pretty much geared towards chemical measurements. Do you think, I mean, I since I'm not so familiar, especially with talks and with micro a little bit more, but there's not that much that you can calibrate, right? Unless you're doing PCR, different things, but is it relevant to include something for micro in this section?
So Augustine, maybe I'll go first. So initially, actually, I did have, I expanded on the regression, the linear regression, and added the coefficient of determination, like a R-square. That is a type of approach you can use for like a calibration model for PCR. But I saw this morning and thought, okay, well, it kind of captures it here. And if you're planning to add on the like correlation coefficient or coefficient of determination, like the R-square, I think it fits within this table. But if you plan to elaborate it out again, expand it out, then I can include that back in. I had it written up. It's just I ended up not including it because I saw we're trying to simplify this.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think that somebody who's developing a new method of micro could work with this framework and it's going to be good enough, I say we keep it. But if you think it would help to expand it, I think that's good too.
I mean,
I'll defer to your better judgment.
Yeah, I think it would work. So I think it's up to the team if we feel that we should expand it out. But either way, I think it works.
This is Andrew. I think that we should include some recognition that this micro or even kind of the emergence of like pathogen detection, they're going to use this technology like the PCR approach. So I think it's appropriate that we mention it in some regards that this can be applied to micro methods as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's probably going to be the future of some of these new methods. Sam, would you mind, if you already have that written out, would you mind just sending my way and I can include it into this draft?
I'll do that.
Cool. Thank you. And how Peter, for the talk stuff, that I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I could guess, but it would be wrong probably.
That's okay. I have been woefully neglectful in getting into this. So over the Thanksgiving break, I had planned to sort of break this thing open. I mean, first and foremost, you guys have done a great job of putting this together. I mean, it looks like a real thing now, so pretty impressive. So with regard to calibration, the answer is fundamentally no. There's no real applicable place for it. Because it's not instrument-based testing, so it's all it's all live animal, live organism testing. The way it's written now, the one sidebar on it is sort of the new in vitro stuff that's starting to come out through the recycled water program. There probably are some calibration aspects to that, and I can try to look into that a little bit and put it in for traditional talks, though. The answer is no on the calibration side. Acceptance criteria evaluation, that type of stuff. Yes, there probably are some places. So, it's kind of my intent to pick through this thing over the Thanksgiving break and see where I can, without having to reinvent the wheel on this stuff, just sort of add a sentence or two here or there, sort of what the applicability would be for toxicity method development in there. And then, as we get farther down into the deeper reaches of the document, I might be able to pull some stuff together. Because I mean, with talks, really, it's about having a set of acceptance criteria for negative controls, having a way to test the sensitivity of the test organisms, right? So I mean, are your equivalent of chemistry, of having recoveries and, you know, RPD and matrix spikes. Those sort of have analogies in the toxicity world. And then, you know, providing some mode of evaluation for the backend data. Those are kind of the biggest pieces of it, without really diving into you know, the weeds on this stuff. So to fundamentally answer your question with regard to calibration, all the cals that we do for any instrument-based stuff is tucked in the support equipment sections of TNI. So I don't think that those would be applicable to be put up front with the chemistry stuff, where it's a primary portion of how one would develop a new method. So for this section in particular, I'm going to go ahead and say no, there's probably not much that needs to be added or done with regard to toxicity.
Cool. And for that in vitro stuff, you mentioned you're talking about the like bioassays, like biological endpoints and cell assays and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that the calibration stuff, that's actually something that I kind of know a little bit about, only a little, but I think we could capture what you would do with that technology in here for the most part.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that should be good. And then I did leave this last, you know, section of using other models. I know that some things like some ELISA approaches would use like cubic curves, which always seems weird. But you know, there could be other things that we don't know. Say like a single point calibration for an ICP, for example. I think I don't think we need to go into specifics of those kind of unique applications. That should be, you know, as needed or as the user determines that that's appropriate. Yeah, cool. I see some head nods. So I think that works out. Cool. So then the other section that I wanted to look at was the precision, the RSD and RSC. I cut out all the equations. So we had all the equations on how to calculate these things. I just pulled all of them out. I made it pretty simple. It's like, this is a measure of error. You should look it up. This is what we expect. I will add a section or I actually probably will add one section on coefficient determination and correlation coefficient, just so it's included. In here, I would probably just slide it in after this and kind of do the same kind of short blurb. Does that seem reasonable? Do you think we need more detail than something like this, a couple sentences to describe it?
I don't hear anyone, and unfortunately my Zoom is very strange. I can't see anyone's faces, so that's kind of a bummer. But I don't want to jump on anyone's toes here, so I'm going to be kind of quiet, just because I can't see anyone who wants to speak. But I don't think we need anything extra. What we had before was all the exactly how to calculate it, and I think we referenced both the TNI documents and some other specific guidance that can be found as well that TNI has produced as well.
Yeah, so we referenced the TNI standard, the 2016 TNI standard, the section, I think it's like volume 1, module 4, 1.7, I think. And that specific TNI guidance, calibration guidance document. So they're both in. There's a bunch of examples. I think if people need to figure it out or need to learn how to do it, that's the way to do it. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Also, I guess what I forgot at the top, but what I was thinking that since this is now a document that is a little more cohesive than it was before, I figured that for the homework for the next meeting, we could just everybody read through the whole thing and find stuff that doesn't make sense, or stuff that's weird, or stuff that is lacking. And then we can, I can put all that stuff together and then we can talk about it next time. So I guess that'll be an ongoing kind of thing for this. So those two sections, I made them smaller, tighter. One that I wasn't sure on, I'm not sure. I think Pam wrote this. I don't remember. I don't know. I see head nod. Maybe Carol. I don't know. I forgot. I'm sorry. I totally forgot who wrote it. But I wonder if this is something that we should simplify if we keep it in here. I guess that'll be.
Do we need it? I was just kind of scrolling ahead and saw my name and I'm like, oh, I don't know about this, but
yeah, I realized that I had no idea Yeah, I had no idea who wrote it. For some reason, I thought it was you, but sorry, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know if we need it. I feel like if we do RSD, RSC, and the correlation coefficient, that should cover most things.
I would think so, and you know, if we've referenced, I haven't read through the new edits in detail, but yeah, and you referenced the ATP documents, so I would think that those would cover everything. I mean, because we don't want to tell them how to calculate it, correct?
Exactly.
So I don't know that in. Oops,
Yeah,
sorry. I don't think any of this maybe is needed. I haven't read through it in detail, but that's my thought, and I don't know who did write it either.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's got a lot of how to calculate things, right? That stuff for sure I'll eliminate, but I don't even know if we need, kind of this section on how to determine the criteria for precision. I don't know. I mean,
Well, if you want to go kind of the route that I did with the accuracy is I left it more up to the developer and what regulation they were trying to meet. And so the idea was, I just gave, this is what accuracy covers. And this is where you should go look for accuracy information associated with the specific program you're trying to meet. And then, I've recently updated with, here are some suggested defaults, that you might find and can start with. And I didn't go into the calculating or anything else like that, because I know calculating it because it's all going to depend upon how they go with calculating it, associated with spiking is one way, but then if you're going to, use your reference, they have other statisticals that they need, that you need to do. If you don't have a spiking solution, you use a determined reference material, whether it be one that you say, okay, I'm using this sample, it has this amount in it, and then I'm doing my accuracy testing on it. All that has other statistical aspects with it. And so we could get really bogged down in the calculation pieces of it. I think it would be better if we just reference them as examples. You can go give them the reference and say, you can go here and find examples on how to calculate precision. And then we're not being as prescriptive, because one of the things is once we become that prescriptive, we're going to get people saying, but you said I had to do it this way.
yeah.
And LTAC said that it has to be done this way. What are you telling me that I'm not meeting the criteria? So that's a big chasm we can fall into that we may not want to.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I would be inclined to maybe for sure remove the calculations out of this, like we've done in all the other sections. I could put in a couple sentences of, you should determine your criteria. Everywhere else that I had an opportunity to put criteria or whatever, I always said reference, what the base method is or what your requester, the whoever's requesting a method needs. Check with them for those criteria, because that's, I don't think we should put any criterion here as an example, sure, but as you must follow whatever percent recovery. No, I don't think that's a good idea. So if that works for everybody, I'll actually tighten this section up and then just put a couple sentences on, you should calculate your own precision criteria if possible. Doing, replicate measurements of a known incurred sample or spiked sample or something. Cool, I see some head nods, so I will do that. Okay. So then the next section that we had was, Carol, you sent the little update to the accuracy. So this is the section you already wrote before. I think it looks pretty cool. I did include the table you added, so we have these two kind of tables. I don't know if this is too zoomed out for people, but we'll have the exam. So these are again examples. Maybe I'll change this to be abundantly clear. This is an example in our requirement, but this is what people use for drinking water, and this is what people use for hazardous waste. I think it's something that we talked about last meeting that was not super clear. I think this is pretty good as a good starting point for people. Any comments, feedback on these?
This is Andrew. Just to Carol's point, is we just want to be absolutely clear. These are just guidance, not like requirements or anything that can be mistaken for an absolute.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe I'll put a little blurb or something in the heading here and make it.
Would it be good to put maybe a foot or like a
Well, at the last
descriptor
sentence,
at the bottom?
the last sentence of the section does say, you need to scroll up.
Yeah.
When addressing bias, start with any guidance or requirements provided by the program. So I don't know if maybe you might want to bold that or something like that to draw it to their attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what I would have written in these. So I think it's perfect. But just so people know, because Andrew's right. Like you don't want to put anything in here, and Carol, you're out too. Like if you say, "Oh, this has to be 30%," I read in the LTIC document it has to be 30%, and then they're just married to that 30%, which maybe is not appropriate.
And
Yeah,
it's
but I think-
definitely not going to be appropriate for some methods such as the toxicological stuff. And so, you know, they're going to be trying to apply things that don't apply to them, you know?
Yep, exactly. Yes, I think having this in bold should be good enough for most people, for most applications. What do you guys think? Or I guess maybe Chris or Carol, since you deal with the state entities more, do you think that would be sufficient for somebody maybe not familiar with the method?
I
understand
want to
it.
put something below the table, so maybe I'll write something that goes
Okay.
below each table of like, this is a guidance and not prescriptive or something like that. The other thought that I had was we have drinking water and haz waste. Do we want to put something in there for Clean Water Act stuff?
We good? Yeah.
I can't.
I'm not sure that they really have
Yeah.
something, because they are, the clean water stuff is pretty much analyte by analyte.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I
Okay.
was thinking.
Yeah, I looked at that and it's pretty prescriptive within each method. Even for hazardous waste, some of it is pretty prescriptive, but they do have like that 3,500 general method and the 8,000 general method, which addresses, you know, preparation and analysis for organics. And that's where I got some of this information from. But otherwise, yeah, the clean water methods and items that I saw in there, it was pretty prescriptive within each method.
Okay. Then we can't do anything kind of general like that. So yeah, we won't have
Yeah.
anything there. But yeah,
Unless there's something in the ATP, which I'm not as familiar with offhand.
yeah, I was trying to remember if they had something like that, and I don't remember either.
I don't think so.
I think they have guidance, but they don't have like a nice clean table like this.
Well, neither did hazardous waste. I had to create it
Right, yeah. But
out of what I could
I'm-
find.
What I'm thinking is that the ATP for the clean water talks more about how to developing it and doesn't give these handy little examples.
No,
Which is
and
kind of where we're going.
yeah, and like you said, that in the ATP that they really defer to the reference method and being comparable to that in the performance there. So it's method by method.
Yeah, I think then we should be good with these two reference tables as a starting point. Chris, if you can add another blurb to these, that'd be perfect, and we should be good to go with those.
Yeah, I will do my best. I've been adding blurbs like that to other documents, so hopefully I
Cool.
can mirror the language.
Perfect. Yeah. Something easy to understand, I think will work out great. All right. So then the other section that I had was from Andrew that you wrote Andrew wrote this ELAP creation request. We had it at the top of the document, which we agreed last time that didn't really make a lot of sense. So now it's right at the end. So after everything else, I think it makes a little bit more sense. I also did change a couple of things, the order of a couple of things. When you get this document, if you think something should be changed, instead of highlighting, copying and pasting, you can actually just grab this whole thing and put it wherever you want. So as you start editing these things, if you think it should be ordered separately, you can do it from the navigation pane and it'll be a little bit easier to track just for future. But yeah, I moved that ELAP creation request to the end, and then you wrote this guy. Which I think is pretty good. This is something that, again, I think we'll have to just read through and see what people think, but I think it states the purpose of what we're working with.
Yeah, if I may, I was trying not to get too caught up in the weeds here, and the intent here was to address a comment from previous meeting from Jared regarding like what's going to be required. Kind of, it was I think he was looking for like there being a standardized method validation package request for all entities, and I was trying to address that it's going to be different for each program, department, or agency depending on their needs, right? And I was trying to get to it, but I was really there's one sentence there that I kind of provided a vague example, but getting at the point of multi-lab validation versus like single lab validation and when it would be appropriate or not. And I was trying not to be too specific because then it goes into the world of, in this scenario, you have to use this, in this scenario, this, and that really should not be, I don't think it should be in this document. I think that's outside of this document, and this is in support of that. But there was this one element here at the bottom, which I wrote, it's really about the ELAP accreditation, and when it is, that method will be asked to be offered for accreditation. I think there's a consideration that we need to address here, in that if it's a non-standard method that's like lab developed, there's specific guidance in T&I of what needs to be followed for the accreditation portion of it, which I don't think those are two separate things. One, a program or agency or may request certain method validation criteria to be submitted in a package, but then once it goes for ELAP accreditation, they have specific requirements that they look at when they offer it for accreditation. So based on their T&I standard, obviously that's not for another couple of years, but I'm throwing it in here being kind of forward thinking a little bit, but I didn't know if that made sense. I didn't know if it's appropriate here. It could probably be down into the ELAP accreditation section. But it was something that I was just thinking, I was going through this. I wanted to make sure that we're verbalizing that in this document.
So would this document be used by ELAP, you think, I mean, they will, right, obviously, to assess the validity or make sure that the method is appropriate. But for the accreditation portion, we could include it. I don't know if ELAP would follow this, or they would just go direct to the T&I standard and follow that. I don't know. I guess we could ask our local ELAP representative.
I was gonna say, I think I would like to edit the last statement just a little bit. But in general, ELAP, I think we need to try to separate these two thoughts. One is the method good, and two is it auditable? And ELAP is really focused on, is it auditable? But this document is really talking about, is the method good, right? Because that's the whole point of validating your method and creating all these specific criteria, precision, accuracy, that kind of thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's auditable, right? So that's the stuff that we look for is, can we audit it? Is there some way to tell if a laboratory is or is not doing this method correctly? But I think in that regard, we want this to go more towards the end. Just look based on our flow kind of chart that we have. Validation is at the end step of chart 1. So I think including this with that little post method development ELAP accreditation thing section that we have would probably be good as well. Moving it all the way at the end.
That works. I could move it down to the end, and if you want to reword it or anything, it'll be there.
Yeah,
to
and
reword.
and somebody asked, I think it was you, Austin, that if we would use this document. Yes.
Okay.
We want this document to be created so we can use it. So yes, we want that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. But then the accreditation portion would be handled, by your criteria, your standards, and all that stuff.
Right. And then
Cool.
it would be at an agency's request after the agency's reviewed the labs method and that kind of stuff. So, and I had touched
Cool.
on that in that section as well.
Sounds good. So we have these guys down. The last one, and then I did not get a chance to look at Sam's section. Let me see, where did it run off to? Sam, did you want to go over these changes? Sorry, I was going to read it and I totally ran out of time.
Sure, no problem. So I think I was tasked here to just take this bullet points and put it into narrative form. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think, I don't want to read it off, but, when we go through the document, feel free to just kind of read it and just make sure that I interpret it the way that was meant to be interpreted. But the part that I just maybe go down and keep going down. So the qualitative tests for non-chemical, that's something that's new here. I made this very specific to micro, but I know we were also kind of thinking about anything that's non-chemical. So, feel free to, provide any input, but
actually, I would like to propose from the chemistry side point that we only make this section applicable to micro, because it really isn't applicable to the chemistry. So I think that this is one section that we need to clarify micro only, or that type of test. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sounds good then. Yeah, so I wrote this separate section up where for qualitative test methods that, it's generally so this is based on the ATP microbiology EPA document that states for any qualitative methods, generally you need to have more samples, and they give a example as to when you do a side-by-side comparison between a new method and a reference method, that you need this number of samples as well as replicates. So I kind of try to summarize that here in this qualitative test method. So I'll stop there and feel free to put any input, provide any input.
Yeah, I think Pam, you're right. This is totally micro specific. I don't know if this would apply to other things. It might, maybe to radio or something, but maybe not
to radio. So
No, it would just be
could make it
micro only.
either micro only or non-chemical. Yeah.
I think the thought here was we would try to marry it with, say, microplastics, right? We were given that example a couple months back. But again, I think we would want to change it to say we suggest or suggested replicates, that kind of thing, because depends on what agencies can be using it. But yeah, it doesn't really apply to any kind of chemistry one that I know of.
Yeah, and the issue with trying to apply it for the chemical is that basically this number of replicates is 5 times more than what we would use for a qualitative. So it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it'd be
not 5 times,
pretty
3
pretty
times.
tough to do this
Yeah.
kind of work for like microplastics. It would take a
Yeah.
very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Months.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe just saying instead non-chemical or making it microbiology or other. I mean, if something else comes up somewhere down the line that applies to this, we can always say, the closest thing is this, look at that. But at this point, I would say make it micro only.
Okay, so
Could-
we'll update it to make it micro, not just more generalized, non-chemical.
Right, yeah, and the whole section, starting up at the top with screening/qualitative. The whole thing is micro.
Yeah, I just don't know what we would do. The only thing that I could think of is something like microplastics right now that might apply, but it would be on a way different scale than this.
Well, we have other areas that are false positive, false negatives, those controls.
Mhm.
But this section on how to determine the false negatives and false positives is very specific to micro. Others have the positive and negative controls, and microplastics would have the same thing. And like you said, you're probably not going to do 50 samples for microplastics, or what would be like 100. For these.
So if this is going to be specific to micro, then I'll go through it again and maybe review these areas one more time, because I do feel like some of these are specific to like chemistry, like for example, he says here determining percent of false positives, citing using SW846, that's a chemistry method, right? So I think this was written up with the intention that it's going to be applied for a chemistry method. So if we're going to make this all micro, then I think it needs to be revamped. Just my thought.
But possibly, but yeah, I mean, because there isn't something in SW846 where you do the selection of samples for homogeneity and such. There is in the Clean Water Act, but not in SW846. So that reference even is incorrect if it doesn't apply to micro, which, yeah.
So just, I wonder if there, two things. One is, I wonder if there's room in the areas where, the number of samples are named, that instead of having a number in there, you write a more generalized statement of a sufficient number of samples per the program design objective, whatever it may be, so that it's not as prescriptive and it may be able to be applied across other matrices as well. And then, determination of false positives and negatives and the use of negative controls and blanks, that is a thing for environmental toxicology. So, I may be able to hybridize this section a little bit more and move it to cover the other areas of analysis.
So maybe it's micro and toxicology, but
Yeah.
This whole term screening really has a different meaning, I think, in the chemical world. We think of screening as a quick and dirty. This is way more than what we would do. And that's why I don't want to have this called the chemical screening, because that would be, it would not go through this level. So, I mean, there are some like immunoassay type tests that are done out in the field for chemical screening, which maybe that would be what this is applying for, but I don't have a lot of experience with those tests. It's like those wipe tests that they do for you at the airport where they're looking for the nitrates.
Yeah, I think for the chemistry side, it's a more reasonable screen would be like a threshold type of thing, not this kind of detail. So yeah, maybe we can just describe it as a micro and tox. Be specific, that's not chemistry.
Does that non-chemical tag that we had down in the lower section, would that work? Change the title to be like qualitative or
Yeah,
something for non-chemical analysis.
yeah, for this whole section, say qualitative methods for non-chemical. Yeah, I think something like that would be cool.
Yeah, we'll have to sort of see how the final language shakes out, because I mean, screening and toxicity is Pam sort of mentioned, it's generally a quick and dirty. You'd never base compliance results or anything like that on it. It's, it's not quite the same sort of present absent side as micro, but it's, a way to sort of do a higher throughput to get some idea if you have a problem or not. But it's generally still following standardized methods in terms of running it. You just take a shortcut here and there with reducing replication or something to give an indicator, but it wouldn't come out, I don't know. I'm not super familiar with micro, so I don't know. The number that's where the number of samples thing kind of comes in a little bit, is that, there's no way that anyone's doing 200 toxicity samples on a screening phase.
What about just calling it like qualitative and taking out screening?
No, because we have qualitative determination in chemistry. I mean, that's fine if you want to take out the screening, but you'd still need the non-chemical, because we would not do this for a qualitative determination. That's very different. And we've addressed that the qualitative is things like, the ions, the retention times.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I mean, qualitative, non-chemical, and that way, we can, the micro and toxicity can maybe, we can include those two under this section.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize just for my own sake and hopefully everyone else's as well. I'm bummed I can't see anyone's faces. I don't know what's going on with my Zoom, but the whole top of my screen is a white bar, so it's kind of crazy. But I think we're going to change the title of this to be qualitative. I think Augustine mentioned threshold testing, so maybe qualitative or threshold testing for non-chemical analysis, and then we're going to remove all of the numbers and replace them with Peter's suggestion, which I liked, a sufficient number of samples, and then leave it at that.
So
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, I for that basic part, I just did a quick search of the document for qualitative. And we have something in the MDL portion where it says it meets all qualitative identification criteria. However, I was looking through this and I don't see anything for the chemical qualitative, which is kind of what I was talking about. You usually have two things to make it a method determinative. Like for a GC, you would have the retention time, and then you would have a second detector or a mass spec detector. Did that maybe get lost, or maybe is that just going to be in the methods?
You're talking about this section, right, on what I'm highlighting on the MDL or whatever we're going to call MDL.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I missed that. Yep.
Yeah, so
I
yeah,
did a quick search and there's no qualitative in that section.
Yeah, that's it. Not in that paragraph. I just know that
Right.
sentence. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So never mind. That's what I was looking for.
And I saw, Sam, that you added this too, which is a question that I had of, detection limits for micro things. So I think that works.
Okay.
Cool.
And I misspelled produces, so.
So yeah, it's an easy fix. Cool. So yeah, I think then that section is cool. Sam, you'd be able to fix those couple things.
Yeah,
in
and
the-
then
the
I'll
previous
work
one?
with Peter. Peter, we're gonna work on that section together.
Cool.
Yeah, sure, that's
Yeah,
fine.
Okay.
that works. And the last one that I had, there was a comment from last meeting about this, sensitivity and specificity. I think this is something that I would prefer if folks could read through it and see if it's suitable. Like the language might be a little funny. Like the qualitative thing here. Yeah, it should probably be described a little bit different so that we have, the analyte identification, the qualitative analyte identification, in addition to the detection limit stuff. But that might be easier if folks kind of work on it and send me some feedback, if that works for everybody. And then the other things, so those are kind of the things that came up last meeting. I have a couple of questions that I saw or noted while I was editing this, and then I'll go to the checklist. So we talked about calibration for micro. So one thing that I didn't really see described very well is blanks for chemistry things. I don't know if it's something that we could have. I just there's no section on blanks, on negative controls and blanks and that kind of stuff. It's obvious, right, that you should be able to get a clean blank. I don't know if it's something we should include in here as part of the.
So we don't have
ruggedness or-
anything on positive and negative controls like TNI does?
I couldn't find it.
Okay, well, and maybe that's what we need just up at the beginning is just a real brief section on positive and negative controls. The positive controls, you see, you refer to the sections here on precision and accuracy and bias. But the negative controls, and TNI has that.
Yeah, that's what I was looking
already.
at. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have the section on selectivity also, which is really what we're looking at with as far as analyte identification. And don't we have a section on selectivity?
We have a section, but there's nothing in there on selectivity really. It's just the calibration curve.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's the selectivity is where that
It
section
should be
could
here, yeah.
Yeah. And then I would add this section, it's like a 1 paragraph from evaluation of selectivity for from TNI.
Would you be able to add that, Pam?
Yeah, I wonder whether it should be broken out separate from the calibration.
It
curves.
should, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it should.
Yeah, and I'm just going to copy and paste.
That's perfect.
So,
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at how TNI is built out. So they have the selectivity, and then what would be? So they have positive and negative controls and matrix under QC. I'm not sure why we didn't just kind of follow TNI whole structure on this.
Okay, yeah. So if you could break that section, I mean, I don't think it needs to be it doesn't make sense to have with the calibration. It should be its own kind of thing. So it could be this kind of empty section on inclusivity and exclusivity. So there's nothing here. So I think we would just remove this section and turn that into the selectivity and have that TNI stuff on, positive, negative controls and what that means.
And actually we can add the Q. This is, like the matrix spiking, the serial dilutions, duplicates. That's kind of what I was looking at as far as the matrix controls. I think that, we just don't call them inclusivity and exclusivity.
Yeah.
So, and I think that came from the original document from she's not here right now.
Judy from Judy's
Judy,
checklist.
yes,
Yeah.
Judy's
Yeah.
checklist, which is totally applicable. It's just that we tend to use different terms in our industry. So, yeah. Make a note for me to change that to selectivity and possibly positive negative controls, which would link to other sections.
Yeah. And yes, speaking of linking to other sections, right now it's set up like this because it's easy to maneuver and easy to work around. I think for the final document, I would rather have it kind of structured like an EPA method, how everything has sections and numbers and it goes down, just to keep it consistent. Because right now we have some sections that are, this kind of A, B, C, D, and a one, but then we have other ones that are lowercase and some that are bullet points. So I would, make it all the same. So it looks like it's the same document. But I would probably do that at the end because it is easier to work with the sections.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once it's all tightened up, I'll put section numbers and then I could link those sections. That's why I'm putting like little notes to remember of reference this, reference that in certain places. So I'll have that all tightened up at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably going to be some changes that'll be necessary for us to be able to post it to our webpage as well. There's all sorts of legal requirements that we got to meet for anything that we post.
Okay.
So,
Okay, good point. Yeah. Then maybe they won't be live links. It'll just be section numbers. And
I think we can do 2 different ways of doing it, but yeah, section numbers would be good. And then
Okay.
things. And then Andrew, I see you put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, I know you were talking about labeling it positive, negative controls, but you mentioned kind of blanks, and my world I consider blanks as the bias of the method. And so I kind of think it would be appropriate to put it there. But I can see this is where we get in that conversation is like, there's sometimes some sort of like QC sample might be appropriate for both many sections or multiple sections. So, referencing up and down, I think we're going to have a kind of, maybe have to revisit where certain information goes for a logical flow of the document. So anyway, I was thinking that method blanks could be put into a bias or some sort of blurb in there in the bias section.
So, and I'm trying to understand under what field is it that blanks are biased?
Well, blanks are a measure of potential contamination from the process, from the laboratory, and that would bias your results high. And that's
I
why.
see where you're looking at it. Yeah. Okay.
So that's an evaluation of bias.
Yeah, that's generally not how the bias is used in chemical methods.
Well, that's how bias is interpreted from the EPA down. And so that's how we, using the Parks process, Parks DQIs, that's kind of one of the measures of bias, or one of ways to measure bias is to analyze method blanks and field blanks and such. And so that's how I would look at it. It's also like, that would be also like, there's many ways of evaluating bias, whether it's instrument bias, whether it's process bias. So there's many ways to do it, but I was just thinking more importantly that, there's maybe different sections that certain information can fall into that we may want to, where's the best way to represent it. In this case, it could be, selectivity in that case, but bias is also another place it could be.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it would be good to put maybe a reference to blanks, like, oh yeah, you reference blanks, and then point it back to positive, negative controls, and have more information down there. One way to determine bias. Because yeah, that was my thought too, is bias, at least from our end, comes into the bias from lab or sampling or transport or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, and I think Andrew makes a good point that a lot of these QC samples will satisfy a lot of these requirements, or give you feedback on a lot of these issues. So yeah, we just reference everything back and forth. I think it should be good. Cool. So that's kind of the big questions that I had, was the negative controls. I did start working on the checklist. Now the checklist turned out to be kind of tough for me because I didn't know what we were going to use it for. So my first thought was that the checklist would be used for the people developing the method to say, hey, what do I need to have? And then I thought, maybe are we going to have a checklist for people to submit data packages. I think maybe Andrew mentioned that, or Chris, I don't know, somebody mentioned, but that you didn't really want to have a data package requirements that you must have this, and this. I don't know how we want to do it, but the checklist I started putting together and I kind of stopped because it would just did not make a whole lot of sense, was like a cover sheet for a data package is what I envisioned. So that the developer can say, hey, I need to have a description of the method or why I'm doing it or why it was requested. I should also have my SOP. I should have, summary of the calibration for every single analyte, the curves, the fits, the recoveries, the RSC, all that stuff. Is that kind of what you were thinking for the checklist, or is it something more detailed? You must measure your bias in the blanks. You must look at your reproducibility, or these things. What were you thinking?
I think we had discussed earlier that it would be a like if used, basically everything is a if used here.
Mhm.
But I think designing it more towards like a data package submittal that would go to a regional board sounds like a good idea. Just so that way of like, look, these are all the things that the agency will be reviewing. So these are all the things you should have, right? You should have some way to do selectivity ruggedness, some way to do detection limit subtlety if used, right? If you don't have a detection limit for one of the many things that we've talked about here, then you wouldn't have it in there, right? Wouldn't be needed. So I think a checklist in that regard of like a data package sounds good.
Okay.
But it is kind of hard to work on when we are still filling in sections.
Yeah, that's what I recognized as putting together. I'm like, it seems weird because I was building it like that. Like you have to include these things so that the reviewer can review it. And I also wanted it to be kind of a helpful tool for the people reviewing the method, because I imagine the reason we're putting this package together, or this document together, is because the people requesting the methods and reviewing the data maybe are not so familiar. So they don't know that they need to look for the curve fit to make sure that they're using RSD for a average response factor calibration curve or something. So I figured it would be a checklist useful for both the reviewer and the person putting it together for the data package. So if that makes sense, I'll keep working on the checklist. Obviously, as we change the document, the checklist will change, but it'll be roughly based on the table of contents pretty much, if that works.
And we have to be very clear on what its usage is, because as you say, somebody using this to review a method, agency using it to review a method, it runs under the same problem we have with, the users of the document that we're creating. You have this checklist, and if I'm not familiar with this whole process, I'm going to say, okay, everything on this checklist needs to be in this package. And we know that that's not going to happen for every method. There's going to be exceptions. It doesn't apply here and it doesn't apply there. So we got to be very clear on how to use this. So that if it's going to be used as a checklist to be given to an agency, that it's very clear to the person developing it that they need to identify this, that it doesn't apply to this method or something like that. So the agency understands that it doesn't apply and they're not expecting it to be there. That's where I go. It's one of those really gray areas as to how best this is going to be used and how we need to set it up so that both the user and the end reviewer aren't expecting all of this to be included into a package.
I'm going to tag Andrew here. I know he's got a meeting he's got to run off to in a second, and he's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I have to run, so I apologize. But I agree with Carol. We have to be kind of very explicit on the use of this. I think of it as a checklist that we use in our shop, which is a QAP review checklist. And one of the issues with it is not all project plans are going to require the same information. You know, there's not a one size fits all. And so when you use a checklist, you're automatically thinking, yeah, it needs to have all those elements, which Carol alluded to. But the other problem is it's a presence absence type review, which is also not necessarily good, right? Because you're not actually evaluating whether or not the method meets your needs. And so that's another kind of concern of how to develop it. So there's more of a more robust review of the method that it meets the program's needs versus is it there or not. So that was my 2 cents, but I do like to have checklists because I think it's informative to a submitter and also someone that's receiving a package, what they know what's in there. It's just, you know, making sure that it's really detailed of what the purpose of that checklist is.
Cool. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I can work on that on, oh, go ahead, Carol, you have your hand up.
Just, you know, some of my, based on what Andrew just said, it may be that we don't necessarily identify it with like data package page numbers, is we may end up putting additional columns in, such as applies to this method, yes, no. Meets regulators or whoever's needs, yes, no. That kind of thing, which it's more of a checklist for the person putting together the package, but is also a secondary checklist that can be used by the end user that says, okay, you say you meet my needs here. I'm going to go double check this section, or, okay, I don't have to worry about this because it doesn't apply to the way this method, or I'm going to check and see, does it really not apply to this method? So it may be a little bit more along that lines is what we want to make our checklist with, because then it could be useful to both sides.
I think that's a great suggestion. I'll work on the checklist and then run it by you guys and see how it progresses, see what you think. But yeah, I think it's very important to have that description, the blurb, what it's used for and what it's not used for. So I'll work on that as well. I'll put that kind of some language up top, and then start filling the gaps for the items, and then a few more columns. Like what you mentioned is great. Does it apply to this method? Yes or no? Because if it's just a bunch of things and the developer says, nah, not applicable, just cross it off. I think it'd be good to have it clear. So that's good. Thank you. I think that's kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about or discuss. We're for sure missing stuff, right? There's stuff that's not in here that I was reading over it a couple days ago. I'm like, we should probably have this, or we should probably have that. I think it'd be really helpful if we could just go through it. It seems long. It's like 32 pages, but it's a lot of, empty space. So it's not so bad. If you guys can go through the sections, not just your sections, but the sections that other people wrote, get some feedback, say, hey, this is weird. That's not appropriate, or we really need to talk about this as the homework. Then I could put all that stuff together and we can, kind of fill in the gaps. I think it's close. I think it's a document that actually looks like a document. I think we have a pretty good structure. The layout might be, or the order of things might be weird. We might be missing some gaps, but I think it's getting there. So does that sound okay to folks? See some head nods, so that's good. I don't know if Chris, do we have any public comments? We have to check for that.
We do actually, and I was going to pitch it over. He's been in this call the whole time, and I hope hearing our discussion has kind of adjusted, or at least put his comments into words. But let me pull up the email that I had so I can give him an introduction. You have to forgive me. I had quite a bit of emails in this meeting. There goes Dan Salas, for the LIMS and QA administrator for Orange County Water District. He attached a document which I can share with all the members here afterwards. Yeah, this was sent yesterday afternoon. Okay, great. And he's really been working on the recycled water contaminants of emergent concern, and has some experience with a regional board that has some more specifics. And so hopefully he can provide us some input as well. So Dan, I think I have to ask you to unmute and share your screen, or share your video if you can do that. I can't see anyone, unfortunately. So
Okay, yeah, I'm here. My video's on. I think everybody else can probably see me.
Yeah, we can see you.
Yeah, I'm Dan Sauls from the Orange County Water District. So I originally made this comment. I think meant to make this comment back in spring, but submitted it kind of late just before the meeting. But I'm kind of want to come around and make it again. So we had some experience back in spring with working with Tricia Lee from the State Water Resources Control Board. They were putting together kind of a similar effort where they were putting together a method validation package for recycled water for monitoring contaminants of emerging concerns. So, we work with them and crafted a document. It'll be shared to you. It's much simpler than yours. I think in the end, it's only a few pages long. So, but I think kind of two main reasons I wanted to make a comment. The first was just to let you guys know, there's another entity or entities working in the state on similar projects. So you might want to reach out to them, and I don't know if, merge your efforts, or, they can maybe take your document when you're done with it and use it for contaminants of emerging concern. I don't know. Like I said, what we got to was pretty simple, much simpler than what you guys are dealing with. But it's, we had a prescribed set of just a few methods and just a handful of analytes. So we didn't have to make it work for microbiology or toxicity or whatever. So it was much simpler. But yeah, just, we kind of noticed as you guys were starting this project, like here's two different state entities doing a similar effort. So we kind of just wanted to point that out. The other thing is, we are in the world of recycling water, and we fall between drinking water and wastewater, which makes our lives difficult because we have to comply with both sets of standards. Drinking water is usually more stringent and more difficult to meet. And because we have a mixture of samples, we generally kind of treat everything as drinking water, which is difficult because we have to set up our methods to work with, down to that level, and yet still handle wastewater, which is, much dirtier matrices, much higher concentrations. So it's really difficult to have methods that work both that meet drinking water requirements and get down to that sensitivity, but also can handle dirty wastewater samples or river water samples or groundwater samples, or, so we really have to run a huge spectrum of samples through our instruments, through our methods. So, there are method modifications available under wastewater, like under 40 CFR 136.6, but those are not available to us under drinking water. So for instance, if we were wastewater, we could use a quadratic curve fit for like EPA 300.0. Under drinking water, we're not allowed to. If we were wastewater, we could do like a collision cell with KED for 200.8 to handle a lot of our interference issues. But in drinking water, we can't. I mean, there have been discussions about allowing that since we've got memos going back to like 2005, where people have been asking for this, and we're just sitting here waiting for the EPA to ever get around to it. We talked to Perk and Elmer about it. They're frustrated about that too. So just, please keep in mind there's people out there, recycled water is a growing thing. There's only gonna be more and more recycled water plants and laboratories analyzing recycled water. So if there's something you can do with this method validation process to allow us some relief, or to carve out a space for us, because it's difficult to run, drinking water sensitivity, drinking water regulations, drinking water, standards, but still have methods that work for wastewater matrices. So that's pretty much everything I've got to say.
I mean, I think that's a great point, Dan. Thanks for bringing that up. When we started, or at least when I started kind of putting together my sections, I did think about that questionnaire that Tricia put out. That was kind of a small version of this, like you mentioned, a little bit more tight and prescriptive. But what we're trying to do here is not keep it so strict. Like we're not going to say, oh, you can't use a collision cell for drinking water because the EPA never validated it. As an aside, I think they are finally moving towards that. So in not so distant future, I think we will get that, which is gonna be great. We're very excited, but yeah, it's written in a way that is, for use in that particular situation. So it'll be whatever's the best available, provides the best data for that matrix or that type of sample or whatever you're working with. I think would be met by these requirements, because it's all, you have to define your own, precision and accuracy. You have to see what your detection limits are in your type of samples. So I think this document will be general enough to totally help with recycled water folks, which I know is tough. You're looking at drinking water levels in wastewater samples, so it's difficult. But I think the way that we've written this, or we're planning on writing this, it'll kind of accommodate that.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Carol,
and
thank you for your time. Oh, sorry.
I had a little bit of time to flip through the document you provided this morning, just to make sure that like I could understand your comments, and you're totally correct. I think this document, the one that you have here, is very similar to what we're writing here, but they have some like prescriptive requirements they wanted. We had another regional board that was working on imidacloprid analysis. They had the same kind of table of we want something that's very specific, and they've defined their needs of exactly what they want to have and what they want to see in an SOP that gets provided, so they can make that determination to whether or not this meets their program's needs. And so I think that's what we're trying to do here is complement that and bridge that gap of very specific programmatic sections, which we don't want to touch because we kind of want this to be available to any program that wants to use it. So I think we are bridging that well, and I think they'll be able to take some of the pieces that are here and use it in their program. But I don't know if we're going to incorporate their specifics into ours, because we want to keep them separate. And yeah, we have been talking to the recycled water folks and the folks doing CECs, just to get our heads around what they're trying to do as well. But yeah, it's complementary kind of instead of substitution, more so.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to mention also. It's exactly complementary. Like I envision the situation be the recycled water folks say we have this requirement and there's no method. So then the lab would go to this document that we're working on to come with the method and then provide the data that the entity needs. So yeah, they're definitely complementary. Sorry, and Peter, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I was going to kind of say the same thing as you just did, Augustine. And I wonder if we look at this almost as a test case, in that if we took our document that LTAC's putting together and then, reference the one that, Dan put out and said, okay, if someone was following our guidance in this document, could they then produce something that's like this recycled water specific thing that has the details that we don't necessarily want to touch? Are we covering all the bases in ours that would allow them to produce something like this for a specific program? So it may, thanks for sending that, Dan. I think it'd be an interesting little test case for us to be able to look at ours and then look at what you've put together and said, okay, did we address everything in ours that would allow someone to be able to produce something like this specific for a program?
Yeah, that's actually where I realized that we didn't have anything about the blanks. Looking at the recycled water documents, like, oh shoot, we gotta have that. So yeah, it's totally a good use test case for it.
Great. Yeah, like I said, this was fairly simple. It was kind of based on the EPA's ATP, but pared down. Like I said, on the one hand, it's prescriptive, but on the other hand, because it's for a small number of analytes and methods, we could get it down to just a couple of pages or a few pages, which is nice, because I think the original ATP was like 60 something pages. So, and I think you guys mentioned you're up to 30 something pages now. So, but yeah, it's understandable. The more breadth you want to cover, the longer it's going to have to be to cover all those situations.
Yep. Yeah, but that's what we're trying to go for. In general, that'll work for everybody.
So thanks for that, Dan.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Cool. So I think for the next action items, I guess. We already kind of have an idea of homework for folks. Chris, I think you took some notes. I took some notes too. Oh, go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, I just had a question. I will work on what my sections are, is the selectivity, I think, and the inclusivity, exclusivity. And unfortunately, Andrew had to drop off because before I start on it, I just kind of want a definition. I did not use bias as a blank, and I had to look it up, and that's from SW 846 chapter 1. Bias is on a spiked sample only, and that's where I was looking at. So I had not seen, I get where it's coming from on bias on the blanks, but that's generally not how it's used in Park. It's more like a PT sample would be the bias, where you determine that, or on a matrix spike, or something like that. And so I'm fine with adding the sections according to like TNI, adding a positive negative control, but I don't think I want to call blanks bias based on other references that don't. If everyone on this call is okay with that. And Christopher, you had come up with that to you, the bias was the blank also.
Oh, it's
so I
not,
don't know.
it's a way. I want to make that clear. It's not the only part. It's one of those that you're testing for a different kind of bias. You're testing for, is there bias
Right.
coming from transportation or things like that.
Right. Yeah, I know. And we get into like English definitions
Right.
versus method
Right.
definitions and general
Exactly.
general world stuff. So I'm gonna I will work on my section based on the EPA definitions and TNI, if that's acceptable with
Yep.
everyone. And I can reach out to Andrew and let him know where I'm seeing why bias is a spike sample, not a blank.
Yeah, I think it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I'll volunteer him for you to work on it with you.
Okay. Well, I'll just send him the reference that I was looking at.
Oh,
But,
sure. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I'm just going to cut and paste from TNI because I don't think we necessarily need to recreate the wheel.
No,
and
I'm trying not to.
Yeah, and the other comment I had, I think kind of to what Dan is working on is, I think that we need to really work harder on getting this away from perfection and getting it completed, and then work on the revision 1. I mean, I think that we've been saying that the last 3 or 4 meetings. So I say we cut it off December. It's done or it's not. And then we go on to revision 1. But I think that we need to not keep giving ourselves more and more homework. If a part isn't perfect, let's mark it as, under consideration or something like that. But I think that there is a need in the community for, like people like Dan, others, they can use these and give it feedback. So I really think that part of our homework needs to be, boom, December 5th, it's final, or whatever that date is. And we're not putting that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. We're pretty close. Like if everybody can just go through, give the once over, I think we can get something out pretty quick. Chris, what do you think? Could we push that and then just do another quick revision 1 on it soon after?
Absolutely. I was thinking ahead of time of kind of when's the next meeting going to be, and I think Pam, having the deadline be early December, I think for a meeting to be able to make sure that we're all in agreement on all of the edits, and then possibly one more after that, just because I know that it gets to be a headache with sharing documents, and timing and and being able to actually review it and digest what's been said and what's been written and agree with what's been said and what's been written. So possibly one more after that, and then I'd say we'd be voting on it to say yay or nay to bring it to the full LTAC for their consideration.
I agree. So should we look at dates for our next meeting?
Yeah, just a general sense of folks' availability. I know November ends on a Wednesday or something like that. And then December would start on that Wednesday. So would people prefer before the 5th or the week after the 5th? If we had to pick one of those.
I mean, I would rather get it done sooner rather than later, but I know everybody's busy, so it'll depend on availability. But I think the sooner the better. Since I think the homework that there's not a lot of heavy lifting, I think, for the next meeting, except for maybe, I think, Peter, you're going to add some stuff on talk, so it'll be, I guess, depending on how quickly you can get it done, I guess. Hate to put so many things on you, but
That's fine. I have been challenged to make time today to do it, but the Thanksgiving holiday will provide a little bit, at least a day, for me to get into it. So yeah, I can. I'll try to push those edits through and have them to you that mixed week of November and December.
cool. Yeah, so I'm good pretty much most until the end of the year. So what do people think? Does anybody object to that first week of December?
I prefer the 2nd due to some things I have scheduled that first week.
Sure.
Now,
yeah,
granted, if we're talking about having a meeting on a Friday, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at my calendar too. Friday looks like optimal times for at least one of those weeks. So maybe I'll include 2 weeks of choices for the time fill survey that we get, and try to get it as early as we possibly can, that we get the majority of the folks there.
that works.
And then after this first December meeting, I think that's the point where we would have any kind of last minute discussions, and we'd have a draft. Oh, I can see everyone now. Cool.
Sorry, I forgot. I was still sharing.
At that point, I think we'd have a draft that we can put out for public comment before our last meeting. And so that way we can get any kind of final commenters that say, oh, these are things that absolutely must be in revision 1 or B, or however we want to go about naming the next series, because we know it's not perfect, but we want something done. So that way we can say, let's start working on the next group and possibly get different folks from LTAC involved on the next revision. So that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, I would suggest even making the checklist revision 1, just so that we can get this completed.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe leave as is, but adding in those 2 columns, I think would be good, that Carol had mentioned, and then saying that's definitely focus for revision 1 or B or A, or however we want to go about it. Point 1. Or it could be like standard methods and just change the year all the time. That's also fun. Okay, does anyone else have any items? I'll check last minute for public comments. I don't think we have any other than Dan, which was great. I was thinking we would have Jared show up again, but he was not able to make it, so he may have comments for us next meeting as well. So that'd be nice. Anyone else got any items? All right, hearing none, I'll pass it to Augustine, I guess, to close.
Yeah, do we have to have a motion to close? I don't know how this group.
I don't think we've done any motions to close
Okay.
for this group.
So in that case, I'll just wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving.
You as well. Yes.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.